guys, what's up? This is going to be my review of All Hail by Norma. Now first off, I can say that I went through a couple phases of how good I thought this album was upon listening to it originally, and then subsequently, and then subsequently again. And it's ended up as a pretty high rating, I think. We'll see as the categories go, but it does seem like this is a well put together album, I want to say. Now, lately I have been sort of talking to the artist to get some inside scoop on what's going on with the release that is coming, but I wasn't able to do that. I tried talking to Corey Brandon, but he's a busy guy. He just really is, and so I didn't really get that chance to talk to one of the band members to bounce things off of them and see what's going on here. So I'm doing this without that, and so because of that, this review might be a little bit shorter than the other ones that I've been doing lately. So just keep that in mind. Now, first of all, I have to say the vocals in this and the presentation of the lyrics is really, really good. And what's more is that it goes really, really well in line with the rest of the music. These things seem to tie together really, really well between the lyrics and the music. And that just goes to show that Corey Brandon and Norma Jean have been doing this for a pretty long time, and so they know sort of how to write these songs. And part of that, I want to say, is because they're always experimenting with new ways of doing things. And as you see it, as you can see them talk about occasionally, every once in a while, how Norma Jean talks about it, is there's no lack of ideas for these guys. There's really no, it's like a bottomless pit. These guys always have different ideas going on in their head. They're just very creative people, artistic people, and they just always have these different ideas that they can try out. So what that leads to is if you do that long enough, it ends up being a thing that you can create some really good stuff, because you have been doing this for so long and experimenting and seeing what works and what doesn't work, and what sounds good and what doesn't sound good. And so because of this, it ends up with this album of All Hail, being a really good album, I want to say. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, because I thought it was kind of an interesting thing, is that it seems that Corey Brandon, I follow him on Twitter and he follows me on Twitter, but anyways, what I wanted to say was he seems to have been planting these seeds of what's in the lyrical content of All Hail for months, long time up to the release. As I recall, I think the copyright or when these songs were done, or when the writing was done, or whatever, was all the way back in February of 2019, and now it's November. But this album released on the 25th of October, and so they had a long time to sort of hype up the album and talk about the album, and just present the album as what it is. Now, as far as the sound goes, this is really a cool sound. It almost has some mathy feels to it, some progressive feels to it in terms of what it sounds like, and at the same time, it almost sounds like the kind of music that would sound good backwards, as weird as that sounds. It sounds like it would be good music to listen to if you just played this thing backwards. It just seems like it'd sound great backwards. For whatever reason, it just hits me that way. So let's get into the categories, shall we? So first up, we have the rhythm in light of the notes. And I want to say they do a good showing here. And overall, the whole album is pretty good. I remember when I did my review of with Errors, that I said that it was a very balanced song, and I think that really is a trend that remains for this whole album. And the reason I think that is because, well, I'll get into it later, but the composition is actually quite good. So in terms of the rhythm in light of the notes, they do a good job here. The rhythm is somewhat interesting. It's more interesting than it is not interesting. And I also want to say that they take a sometimes a new look at how to play these notes in a rhythm, and that's really cool. I think that they do this. They kind of experiment the way they play these notes in rhythm. So hats off to them for that. That's going to end up giving them a 1.8. Now, in light of the notes in comparison to the rich and complex, this is another category that they get pretty good. Probably not as good as the rhythm in comparison to the notes, but the notes in comparison to the rich and complex is not weak at all. So I won't be docking them on a below average score here. They might focus more on it sounding good rather than playing these rich and complex melodies. Now, that said, there is some sort of mathy sort of work going on underneath this, and there is some sort of progressive feels to what they're playing, but it's almost like they play things in a light that's almost backwards, I want to say. So that's there as well. So the notes in white of the rich and complex, I'm going to put this at a 1.8. Now, in white of the rich and complex, in white of the composition, this is another category that I think they do pretty well. Where they really get it nailed down is in the composition, which I'll talk about that in the composition in light of the listenability. But in the rich and complex category, I want to say it's more different than it is rich and complex, if that makes sense. It does sound good, it sounds different, but I want to say this is mostly because it's unique in terms of how they play this rich and complex in light of the composition. It's more different than it is actually rich and complex, but it's still fairly good on this one. So, here I'm going to put it at a 1.7. Now, as far as the composition is concerned in light of the listenability, this is a category that I don't think I can dock them at all on. I mean, especially while I'm listening along with the lyrics, reading along in the lyrics, it's just like I'm just blown away by how good this thing sounds and how everything seems like every note is played in a meaningful way, and generally the words go perfectly along with what the music's doing, and the music is not obvious. The music is still refined in this sort of acceptable manner, I want to say. It sort of sounds good. It sounds like a good composition of piece of music should sound, and it sounds fulfilling to listen to as well. Now, I want to say that this is probably a reason why people love this album so much, is because the composition is so good in this thing in terms of the listenability. It just sounds so smooth, it sounds so pleasing to the ear that you can't help but like it. And this is really the reason that I think a lot of people are picking up this album and listening to this thing, is because there's really no flaws in it whatsoever in terms of the composition in light of the listenability. So, with that being said, I'm going to give them a perfect 2 out of 2 on that. Now, in light of the listenability in comparison to the rhythm, this is another category that I think they do above average, maybe verging on that sort of just above average mark, but they generally do a really good job here as well. Not superb, but it is very listenable, and the rhythm is interesting, and it's interesting because it's a little bit different. It's not the same humdrum rhythm that you think of an old man would hum to himself. It's not that sort of predictable sort of nature. And so with that said, I'm going to give them a 1.8 there. So overall, that's going to put it at a 9.1 out of 10. Very strong rating. Thanks for watching, guys. Until next time.